Welcome to the Organisational Inclusionist. I'm your host, Grace Masuro. In this podcast series, we'll be delving deep into the pressing issues surrounding equality, diversity, and inclusion in both the workplace and the broader world. My goal is to foster understanding, inspire change, and amplify the voices of those advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. Throughout this series, I'll be engaging in candid discussions with leaders, experts, activists, and changemakers from various fields. We'll explore the challenges, successes, and evolving landscapes of equality, diversity, and inclusion. From dismantling systematic biases to promoting equal opportunities for all, we'll touch on a broad range of topics. But we won't stop at discussing problems. We'll actively seek out solutions and actionable steps to drive positive change. Our aim is to inspire and empower you, our listeners, to take an active role in making the world a better place for everyone. This is the Organisational Inclusionist. Let's get started. Hey everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Organisational Inclusionist. My name is Grace Masuro and I'm your host. And today I am joined by the wonder that is Scott Whitney. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today and for your time. We are obviously connected on LinkedIn. I'm your LinkedIn fan. But I would love it if you could please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them who Scott Whitney is and what you do.
Yeah, so I'll do a very quick introduction because normally I take forever introducing myself. So I'm Scott Whitney. I became disabled 2020, so fairly recently. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I had a kind of 6 to 12 month cycle of terrible health, which include like sepsis, heart difficulties, not being able to swallow any food, and lots of in and out of hospital, and not really knowing what the prognosis was. 2022, I decided I was going to do a challenge. I thought it was probably the last time, and definitely was the last time that I could do a physical challenge like it. So I decided to use my wheelchair to propel myself to do the equivalent of 3 marathons in January, and use an arm exercise bike to do the equivalent of 6 marathons in the same month. Probably wouldn't, if I put it back by 1 month, I don't think I'd have done it. And my ability to do anything sort of physical has gone downhill a lot since then. And when I was doing that, a friend of mine who works in mental health, he said, when you finish this challenge, you're going to have a big dip because you're doing so much work promoting it. You're doing so much work doing it. There's just going to be this void, this gap, this emptiness. So to stop me having this gap, I started an organisation called All for Inclusion, and we probably U-turned a bit to start with in exactly where we fit, but in the end we settled on a model which is that the vision's all about reducing loneliness within the disability community. People don't understand, I guess, how lonely life can be for some people, not just for disabled people, but I think with disabled people, even if an event is accessible, can you actually get there? And because of things like that, and your health, one day you might want to go, but your health doesn't let you go, people end up stopping inviting you because they don't want to change plans or go to an accessible venue for you not to show, which is through no fault of your own. So we do lots of events online. We've done a few events face to face, and we have an annual awards now as well, which will be face to face for the first time in October, which will be in the National Football Museum in Manchester. So it's it's an exciting time. It's always busy. And always different things going on.
Amazing. Thank you, Scott. I absolutely love what you do. And I love how you've turned your story into purpose and really changing other people's experiences. So when we spoke, I think it was last week, we had a conversation about what we were going to talk about today. And one of the things that you mentioned was the Assisted Dying Act that we've seen a lot of news about, obviously, And it sparked so many emotions in people, especially within the disabled community. Can you break it down for us, and also why you feel it's raising such alarm bells? What's your take on the act itself and how it's being framed versus how it might actually impact people?
Right. So the act it's gone through 2 readings at the moment, and there's going to be a third reading as well. But the act is there for terminally ill people with less than 6 months or less to live to be able to choose to end their own lives. Now, obviously, I've not been in that situation myself, but I live through pain every single day. So I understand the act, I understand why it's there. There's a lot of countries that are doing things similar. So, you go right back to the 1940s. Switzerland was the first country. But then no one for quite a long time. In Holland, it came in 2002. But in Holland, you can request to end your own life from the age of 12, but you need consent from a parent.
Mm.
But you don't if you reach the age of 16, so it's really, really young. There's some countries that have very vague definitions. So Australia, if you've got intolerable suffering. Now, as I've said to you, I'm in pain every single day. A lot of pain, and this is despite taking lots of medication.
Mm.
Is that intolerable suffering? I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. In Spain, it's incurable or debilitating. Now, my condition isn't curable, and it's definitely getting worse. So that's debilitating.
Mm.
And then you kind of look then at Canada. So Canada had a very, very similar law to what the UK is proposing. People who are terminally ill with 6 months or less to live, and they've got they're of sound mind or something similar to that.
Mm.
So that was what theirs was. But in 2016, it amended to those whose death was reasonably foreseeable. So reasonably foreseeable is then not terminal.
Mm.
In 2021, they amended it again to include anyone with a medical condition who were suffering unbearably. So again, I could be classed as someone who is suffering unbearably.
Mm.
Now, again, if we look at Canada as an example, you've got people that are suffering unbearably who may be convinced by family members, by doctors, by friends to go ahead and do this.
So what do you think needs to happen to make sure that disabled people are protected and don't feel like this option is being pushed on them?
It's all about the safeguarding, really. But if you look historically, when COVID was around and they was treating different people differently, is the safeguarding really in place? And are we showing that we're as a nation that we're responsible enough to do this? I don't think we are at the moment. If the bill that goes through has some sort of part to it that says if in the future we wish to look at this for people who are not terminally ill, then it would need to go through as a completely different act. I think that would help some people, because obviously one of the most vocal people at the moment is Esther Anson, and she's got lung cancer, and she's I think, registered to be able to go over to Switzerland to be able to finish her life over there if she wishes to.
Mm.
And that's fine. But you then look at someone like Liz Carr, Tanny Gray Thompson, people like that who, and like myself, who would, in some countries, be able to do this. I think if someone's decision was their decision, then again, it's the fact you've always got third parties involved.
No,
Is it due to money?
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think that's the challenge as well, is who is involved or who is influencing those decisions. And like you said, what is the safeguarding around that? So how do we know that decision has come from that person as opposed to someone who's maybe tired of caring for them or whatever? Do you know what I mean? So if we step back a bit then, when we look at where we are as a society, do you feel disabled people are really being heard when decisions are being made about their lives? Or is it a case of decisions being made for them, not with them?
Yeah, definitely. In general, it's decisions being made for disabled people, not with disabled people. You look at Parliament and our government, Parliament as a whole has very few disabled people there. A wheelchair user couldn't be a member of the cabinet because they wouldn't be able to sit in the cabinet rows. They could only be a backbencher because they're the only places that are accessible. But yeah, I don't think that there's enough focus on hearing from a wide range of disabled people. It might be that we hear from some of the high-profile people that I've spoken about, but every disabled person's different.
Exactly.
And my opinion on this act and this bill has changed completely in the last 2 months. I used to be really for it. Now I'm really against it.
Why are you really against it now compared to 2 months ago?
It was because before I was making a decision that suited me. When I was 40, so I'm 42, when I was 40, I decided that when I reach 60, I'm going to review how my life is. Review the whole situation, review the whole circumstances. And if I want to go abroad and die on my own, I guess, my own free will, that would be what I would do. And that hasn't changed, even despite me opposing this bill. That hasn't changed. I feel like there's times where I feel like I'm living for other people. I'm doing things for other people, and it would be nice to die for me as opposed to for other people. Now, I'm 18 years away from that, so I've got the right to change my mind. I've not signed anything, but when I reach 60, if someone says, do you know what, I think you've made a bit of a rash decision here, I've been quite open about it for 20 years, so people will know it's not a rash decision.
Yeah.
It is something that a lot of thought has gone into. So that was why I was for it. I was thinking, well, it'd be brilliant to be able to not have to go abroad. It might be cheaper. I don't know, but let's be open to it. And then I put a poll up on LinkedIn 2 months ago, and there was a lot of comments that sort of came back that made me then sort of realise about how there are people who can have undue influence on others, and that's what made me sort of just completely flip on the situation. there's one person called Georgia, and she wrote, I think it should be allowed, but the ableism in the health system scares me. I fear that there will be an expectation that with a certain level of disability, you should just give up and die. I fear that they won't support newly disabled people to adapt emotionally and grieve the loss of their previous life. And we'll see a lot of assisted suicide where there should instead be proper mental health support as a first port of call. Whilst I agree it should exist, I'm not sure our current health system won't just end up using it as a semi-genocidal mechanism. And I think that's, there's other people who put very similar words out there. That's the danger is I get told that I can't do lots of things by other people when there are things I can't do, but there's lots of things I can do.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wouldn't want someone to be kind of pushing me towards anything. It should completely be someone.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a Christian, and I'm quite open and honest about that. And I know that there are a number of people probably in my church that would be against this completely, because the view is that we should die naturally. When it's our time, it's our time. So for people coming from a religious point of view, I do describe myself as a naughty Christian, because there's a lot of things that Christians think that I'm not sure I agree with that. But if we look at that religious perspective, or that, I will describe it as a little bit of an extreme perspective, that irrespective of suffering, we should just endure, and that, they stand against this bill because they don't think anyone should be assisted to die. What are your thoughts on that perspective?
I don't look at things really from religious perspectives because I'm not very religious myself. Whereas I have a lot of the same values and morals as people from lots of different religions. I don't see it quite in the same way. But before we came on, I was looking at a website which is called dignityindying.org.uk. So this is a charity that's trying to help push the bill through. There's opposing charities as well.
Yeah.
Now, the website does not give any sources of these statistics. But one of the statistics on there is 80% of religious people support an assisted dying law. Now there's also 86% of people with disabilities support a change to the law. I question both of those stats.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
There's a lot. It's so easy to start throwing figures around and start saying this is what lots of people will say and things. But I would have thought that most people who have faith in most religions would be against it. That's my opinion. I might be completely wrong, but people will see it as a sin, or a ram, or whichever term's different.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. I try and be the best Christian that I can, but I know that, I had an aunt pass away recently, and she passed away in January. And for me, she suffered for so long that when she finally did go, so she was going through chemotherapy and things like that. And when she finally did pass, I felt relief for her. Like I was gutted, obviously, that we'd lost her, but I felt so good that she was finally free and at peace. So I think there is a conflict for a lot of people, even if they are religious, around, just that peace that some people get from death, particularly if they're in pain. So yeah, I think it would be interesting personally. And, I know some Christians won't like this. As long as the bill is created and written in a way that enables people to make the decision for themselves and is based genuinely on real suffering that is intolerable and is, like real suffering, I'm not against it. I think that for me, it would be wrong of me to judge anyone's decision if I am not walking in their shoes. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be against a bill or an act that is written effectively and appropriately. But I definitely look to people like you for that guidance around what that looks like or what it should look like. But why do you feel autonomy in this decision is so important for people with disabilities?
Everyone should have autonomy in their life. Everyone should be able to make their own decisions and their own choices. But why should people who have power of attorneys in place not be able to make a decision?
Mm.
And then the question mark is the power of attorney. That's the power of attorney. They haven't got the same understanding as someone who is suffering, who doesn't need a power of attorney.
Yeah.
So effectively, someone who has, let's say, Alzheimer's and is terminally ill would be treated differently to someone who is terminally ill but doesn't have Alzheimer's.
Mm.
And whichever way you look at that, you cannot balance it.
No.
Because if the power of attorney makes a decision, are they making the decision based on them or the person?
Mm.
So you then need to then go back and look through the person's, maybe their will or what they wrote to the power of attorney prior to having Alzheimer's,
Mm.
and what was written there. So, I've gone through most of this process already. So you would be able to see from me that the power of attorney is acting, and there's proof through letters and things like that. But then you probably have to have a doctor to say that this person is capable of making this decision.
Yeah.
Now, is that doctor, if you put 10 doctors there, would they all make that same decision for the particular patient? So you're starting to get opinion there. And then you can get biases sort of come in as well. So I think how much this person is costing the NHS, or, well, this person could pay for it, so we'll give it to them because they can pay. And,
It's so
lots of
tricky.
other different biases as well that sort of come into it.
Yeah. You made a really good point as well around potentially looking at involving more people in the decision making. So like, more than one doctor. So if we had things built in around there being a team of doctors that look at the information and contribute to that decision. So, because I remember when I was having my treatment for breast cancer, it was a team of doctors that regularly got together to look at my results, etc., and to decide the course of treatment. So whenever I pushed back and was like, do you know what you're talking about? They were like, well, actually, there was quite a few of us that sat down and looked at this. It wasn't just me. I was like, okay, fine. But I also remember that when my dad died, my dad was on a life support machine, and we didn't know he was terminally ill at the time. So he found out a week before he died that he had terminal lung cancer. And my dad told the hospital not to tell us, even though we were there every day. He said, don't tell them. So as far as we knew, based on what our dad had told us and what the nurses had co-signed whenever we asked them, was that he had pneumonia and he was coming home to recover. So I got a call at 11:15-ish to say that my dad had stopped breathing and that I needed to come into the hospital. I got to the hospital and my dad was on life support, and they told me that I would need to decide when they turn it off because my dad is effectively dead. And there was no part of me that was going to make that decision. And I was blown away by the fact that that was a genuine thing that they asked. And I had seen it on TV before, but I didn't know that that really happened. And I think that that's why it's so important that where we can have these conversations as early as possible, that we put our desires and our wishes in writing and let people know, because tomorrow's not promised. We don't know when or if we're going to, become disabled, be terminally ill, anything like that. And it's really important we put it into writing, because for those people that are left behind to make that decision, there are some people that will make that decision because it's easier for them, but there are also some people that won't make that decision. And it might actually have been your will to go. And I think it's really important, therefore, that we almost take that decision away from people, because actually we've said what our wishes are. We've got it in writing like you have. And it's definitely got me thinking, because my mum's she's got early onset vascular dementia. I'm her power of attorney. But for me, that does not involve deciding when and if my mum dies. And it is a really uncomfortable conversation that at some point I'm going to need to have with my mum to understand what her wishes are. What would your advice be for anyone who isn't disabled but is potentially caring for someone who has a disability and maybe hasn't had this conversation or doesn't know what their wishes are? Is there anything that you'd say?
So I had this conversation before I was 40, and it was because of my disability and because my disability impacts my brain. So I have no idea, I could wake up tomorrow and not be fit to make these decisions. It's quite scary when you think of that. I had no accident. I just woke up and became disabled. There was no sort of build up to it. It just happened.
Mm.
And different people have different views, but I use a will writer called Nicola, and she said it's a really kind of unselfish thing to do, because if you write it in there, like you said, do you want to you need to tell us when to turn that machine off. Now, I've got 2 power of attorneys. They're not in play at the moment, but they will at some point potentially become in play. And both of them can act individually. They don't need the permission of the other. So my brother lives in Australia, so I've got a friend then over here that they can both act individually, but I trust them to also speak to each other.
Yeah.
But I've not got I've not got like a DNR in place, a do not resuscitate. But yeah, they know that if asked the question, I would want that quality of life. So I wouldn't want to, if they're asked that question, they would just kind of say yes, walk away. So when you're speaking to someone, I think my will writer was the person that really kind of put this to me, and I thought it was a really good thing. So the quicker you have these types of conversations, I think the better. I know my mum's already planned her funeral. She's not got any disability or condition or anything like that. So I think, the earlier you can take the weight off someone, the better. But you're looking at it from the other perspective. How can you get the weight taken off you? Maybe it's also a case of saying, right, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start planning some of these things for me. So I'm going to plan that it's in writing that if I'm in a situation where I need to be resuscitated, I want to be resuscitated. So I'm going to tell the people who will make those decisions that that's what I want to happen. If I'm on a life support machine and you're asked about choosing when to turn it off, I want to make sure that all the family members are there when the machine is turned off. So please wait until that is possible. You know, you can list the things that you want. And if you say that to your mum, or if you're doing that with people that you care for, and you say, right, this is what I think, what do you think? And then it's starting the process for them. So I think that's how I would go about it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I know everyone's circumstances are different in terms of how feasible it is to have those conversations. But I know that, you know, you're someone that I genuinely respect. So I was really keen just to get your perspective on that for anyone listening that's thinking about, you know, I need to have this conversation with a loved one at some point. How do I broach it? So I've already learned so much from this conversation. And what I like to do is kind of end this session with a bit of a call to action or some final thoughts for people listening. What would your advice be to anyone who might potentially be impacted by this act or the bill, and how they might be able to use their voices to influence what this final act looks like?
I think it's like to your MP. You can go on the internet and see how your MP voted. So there's a lot of people that decided not to vote.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
I was really surprised by some of the votes of some MPs. There were some MPs that I thought would be for it, that voted against, and vice versa. I also know of someone who spoke to his MP personally, and they said, I've already made my mind up on how I'm going to vote, so aren't taking into account what their constituents want.
Oh, wow.
But if you've got a real strong opinion on it, that the kind of biggest influence you can have is either join a march or something along those lines in your local area, or write to your MP. And I'm not going to tell you, you know, which way you should make a decision. That's not mine to do. You know what my thoughts are, but you know, everyone's got the right to make their own decision.
Amazing. Scott, thank you so much for your time today, for your insights and your transparency as always. I have learnt so much from this episode, and I hope that many of our listeners will as well. So thank you for joining me.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Wicked.